I'd like to talk about one reform in particular in the state of Wisconsin that I put forward this session, prevailing wage repeal. But before I do, I think it's important that you understand what led up. Before I do, that's much better. I think it's important that you understand what led up to the point at which I was able to do this session. Most of you recall, pardon the pun, the journey that began in 2010 when Governor Walker became elected and we swept both houses in our legislature. After we were sworn into office, curiously, most of the legislators were chomping on the bit to take on the unions through right-to-work legislation. But Governor Walker had a different idea in mind, and when he came to both of our caucuses, he presented the idea of collective bargaining reform, public employee union reform. And I tell you, there were a lot of legislators who really didn't want to do that. They were really far more interested in the idea of right to work. They thought that right to work was going to be the bigger battle. But as we found out, that was not the case. And the heavier lift actually was the collective bargaining reform. And you all saw what we went through in Wisconsin. After we did that, we enacted concealed carry, photo ID, tax cuts, Castle Doctrine, to name a few. The beginning of this year, we finally did become a right-to-work state. And it was actually a rather anticlimactic introduction of that legislation and passage of that legislation, and many of the new legislators were actually disappointed. They were hoping to have some of the replays of what we went through in 2011. But it was a very easy fight, and now Wisconsin is a right-to-work state. So this brings me to the legislation that I brought forward this session, and that is to repeal the prevailing wage laws in Wisconsin. Now, a lot of people in the public don't even understand or know what prevailing wage laws are. They're very archaic. Most of them go back to the 1930s. There are state laws, there are federal laws. And but all of them, and many states have them. There are actually 32 states that have prevailing wage laws to date. 18 do not have prevailing wage laws. Of those 18, 8 never had them. 10 have repealed them, and or they were invalidated by the courts. But in general, the laws vary by state, but all of them require that a minimum wage or a minimum wage and benefit package are created by government for workers employed on government contract projects. It's just absurd to think that government is in the business of setting these sorts of wage rates for projects, construction projects. I'm not going to go into the details of Wisconsin's law and the specifics of it, but suffice it to say that the prevailing wage laws are created in a very complex manner. It's weighted formulas. The wage rates become the required wage scale when bidding for government construction projects. And in general, it is so anti-free market. I can't believe that they have been on the books as long as they have been. And so I started with the full repeal in the legislature this session. And I'll tell you, there's a danger when conservatives have, conservative reformers have done as many things as they've done, and they have control of the legislature, they have control of the governorship, that complacency can set in. And some of the more moderate members of your caucus will suddenly say, well, we've done enough. Why should we do any more? Why would you want to put us through another battle? And that is my point that I really want to stress to you, because when you have the ability to reform and when you know that the reforms fit your principles, our Republican principles of free markets, then you need to continue to enact. And that was the case with prevailing wage repeal. Because there was a sense that there was a wedge in our caucus, it allowed for a very unholy alliance of members of big union, or big business and big labor. And it became a very protracted debate that ultimately was resolved in the budget versus a separate piece of legislation. And it was a team effort that required the conservatives of our caucus standing together and ensuring that the right ideas, the principles that we believed in as Republicans, were followed through. So I say that to you as your lesson that, once in power, don't become complacent, always take new ground. And I'd be happy to share with you, any of you who are interested, the details of the actual prevailing wage law and the repeal that we actually put in place in Wisconsin. But it's a great idea. If your state has prevailing wage laws, it's time for them to go. So thank you.